I do get the pleasure of introducing this meeting of our Gifts and Leading series, where we focus on one of our members and give that member an opportunity to share his or her story of ministry, leadings in ministry. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Dana Reinhold, whom I assume that you all know. But Dana, we're so glad to have you here. And my understanding is that you will gather in some expectant waiting and that you'll speak out of the silence. So again, welcome, and let's take some deep breaths in expectant waiting.
Good afternoon, friends. Can you hear me okay? Is the microphone working? Okay. I'm humbled to be asked to speak in this forum. There have been a number of really moving presentations by other members of our meeting, and some people have clearly put a lot of work into presenting audiovisual material. And during my many years living in the South, I long ago heard a joke that's not a Quaker joke, but it's Jesus and the devil are walking down the road side by side, and Jesus has this ball of light in his hands, and the devil reaches over and grabs it and says, "Let me organize that for you." And I'm trying my best to not give in to the temptation to be over-prepared and perfectionistic. And this is one of my current leadings, so I'm embodying it today, and I beg your tolerance. And so when I was asked many months ago to talk to you on this date, I said yes, even though I didn't have a clear sense of what it might mean for me to have a ministry, or of what that ministry might be. But I felt a momentum, a movement in my life, and I had the sense that by May 1st, this might be clearer. I find instead that it is less clear, and that also I have a clearer understanding that I am supposed to be less clear right now. And that's really the movement of spirit in my life. I am in a place of not knowing. And I'm practicing tolerating that, practicing releasing anxiety that comes up in response to not knowing, so that I can listen better. And so what I'm going to share with you today may be episodic, may not be well integrated. It isn't a clear story to me. One of the really miraculous things that has happened in my life during the course of the COVID pandemic is that I got thrown down a memory hole and got to really re-examine in depth a lot of earlier parts of my life and piece together things that I'd not ever pieced together and re-examine them in the light of what I've learned in almost 69 years of living, and in being a psychologist, in working in the field of trauma treatment, in working in prisons, and in being called to Quakerism. And all these different perspectives have shifted my understanding of a lot of what happened when I was young. I've ended up understanding myself kind of differently. And so I'm at a point now where I have more freedom to choose what I do, and yet I don't know quite what choices to make yet. And I'm trying not to let the door close prematurely and jump into some choice out of impatience to have made a choice. So the title that I chose for the day, I snatched out of the air a few weeks ago because it didn't have a title. And now it fits and it doesn't fit. Who is our community? As a young person growing up in my family, my parents were not joiners. We weren't part of a larger community, a faith community. We kept to ourselves a lot. To the extent that I identified with groups larger than myself, I had that rosy, fuzzy patriotism that white kids could have easily in the 50s and 60s, early 60s anyway. And I felt like a Pennsylvanian, and I felt like a person in the world. I consumed news, and I read books, and I was really tuned into history from a young age, and I felt empathic connection with a lot of people at a lot of times in a lot of places. And but it wasn't face to face. I changed schools several times, public to private to public to private. It ended up that the school that I retained the strongest sense of community and connection with was the school in Rose Valley, where I went from 3rd through 6th grade. And my grandparents had been among the group of parents that had founded it, and my father and his siblings had gone there, and all of my siblings went there, and my mother worked there as the school bookkeeper, librarian, and nurse. And so that was the connection, and they had putter days, and everybody went and helped fix things. And there was a lot of working with your hands and being outdoors that was part of the educational program there. And then from age 9 until my 20s, we lived on my grandparents' 40-acre farm in a part of Delaware County that's no longer rural, but was quite rural then. And I had a sense of connection with nature there, and a sense of connection with Native Americans who had once lived there. An imaginary connection, of course, but I felt like an outsider. And I was a natural-born seeker, and my parents resisted allowing me connection with any faith community because that was way outside their comfort zone. My mother had been a public health visiting nurse in the city of Philadelphia in her 20s and described what she saw and the people that she met in those households, and the experience over and over of doctors having given orders for home care to be done in certain ways that proved to be impossible or utterly inaccessible when you got into the house itself. You know, they didn't have indoor plumbing. There wasn't money to buy fresh bandages. You know, it was like the things that were the basic necessities weren't available, and that the doctors were on a level where they were oblivious to what wasn't easy to do for people who didn't have middle-class means. My mother was a pretty angry person. I'm going to mention trauma and abuse now, and if there's anybody who needs to leave, I'll give you a little time to do that. She was bullied a lot as a child, and her parents didn't stop it. As a teenager, she suffered a spiritual injury as a result of a sexual scandal in the church she was attending. She wasn't victimized directly, but she was shattered. Her faith was shattered. When it was time for her to go to college, she was promised college, and then at the last minute, the promise was withheld. She was told her parents needed that money to send her brother to a prep school that would enhance his chances of getting into Harvard. And so she decided that she wasn't going to stay home and get a job and look to get married. She was going to take herself off to Philadelphia and go to nursing school. And so she did that. Nursing school tuition was cheap because student nurses worked 40 hours a week in the hospital or more. And so she was pretty angry, but the degree of the anger that she directed at me as a teenager couldn't be accounted for by what I knew about her life. And it was pretty stunning. And it redirected me. It changed the course of my life. I then began about a decade of recurrent major depression episodes. I started with my first therapist at age 18 and several therapists continuing up until the present. I'm not done with therapy in this lifetime. It wasn't until she was in her late 70s that she got information that revealed to her that she'd been sexually abused and medically abused as a very young child in a way that was so common, just routine, and that had had a really horrific, unintelligible impact on her. And it explained pretty well what had happened between the two of us when I was a teenager. And it was like decades before she got that information and shared that with us. Decades before, I had forgiven her. I'd done a lot of work on that in therapy, and I wasn't angry at her anymore about any of that. But it was like puzzle pieces fit together, and we were able to heal our relationship substantially. The other thing was that she was very unconfident. And she passed that on to me. But I was supposed to be the proof that she wasn't so dumb, that she deserved to go to college. And so, like, my job was to be a smart little girl, which I was, and I got a lot of reinforcement for that and a lot of attention for that. And that was my path. I was the bright little thing. And it worked until it didn't work. It took me 8.5 years to get through college, which isn't what happens when there are no impediments. It took me a long time to figure out what I would do for my work, which was a necessity. I mean, I felt a real drive to be able to earn money. When I was 13, my uncle had died of a brain aneurysm on the ski slope. He actually hadn't died. He'd gone into a coma and then lingered 5 days in the hospital. And during that time, they told the children that he was getting better and would be home any time, and then he died. And then they had a funeral on a Saturday and sent the 3 children back to school on Monday, and no other kids on the bus would look them in the eye, and nobody would talk about it. And my aunt, who had no job skills, just plummeted into a spiral of grief and depression for the next couple of years while the kids spun out of control. And my realization was that my mother's family, the adults in my mother's family, didn't know how to support my aunt and her children. They didn't know how to step up for the children. And my conclusions at age 13 or 14 were, a woman must be able to support herself and her children. And when things go bad wrong, somebody has to step up and take care of the kids. So in my late 20s, I simultaneously realized, I want to have children, and oh, I have to get a career. And then I did have a child, and I started graduate school after going back to night school for 3 years to take all the courses for a psychology major. And I started graduate school at age 32 with a 2.5-year-old and a husband totally opposed to my career choice. And graduate school was rough. We had another baby, a wonderful, wonderful gift and surprise while I was still in graduate school. And then we all moved to Florida for my husband's career. And I still finished that degree. And then by grace, I just fell by accident, by grace, into the career that suited me to a T. I needed to do a 1-year postdoctoral, predoctoral internship, and there was one site available 10 minutes from my house at a federal prison. I thought I would hate it. In 2 weeks, I knew this is my path. And then I was hired. One of the reasons that I was hired was that 6 months into that internship year, my younger child almost drowned in a swimming pool during a department party. And my boss and my husband rescued our child, and 2 nurses had arrived 10 minutes earlier and did CPR and got heart and breathing restarted. And while my husband screamed, I saw I couldn't calm him down, and our 8-year-old was being terrified. And I triaged, and I took the 8-year-old inside and sat the child on my lap and talked in their ear about what was happening, what would happen next, what we would do if this, what we would do if that. Just making sure that she felt safe and she knew I was there. And later that evening, in the waiting room of the intensive care unit, she said to me, "This is going to make an amazing story when I get to write it down." And I thought, okay, this kid has grabbed onto a lifeline. This kid has a focus for now. And we had another gift of grace. Our child recovered with a diffuse brain injury, but nothing terrible, and is a happy 33-year-old now and doing well in life. But the staff of my department saw my response in that moment, and they decided they would ask me to take the job that was being offered. And that's how I started a 20-year career in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. So my community included inmates. It included incarcerated people from all 50 states, about 50 foreign countries. And I felt from the very beginning of working there, I know how to be in relationship with people here. I know how to connect. I know how to help. And it was because I had been depressed, and it was because I had been through trauma, and it was because I felt like my life was a mess, and I was no different. I was just luckier. And I would have liked to keep working there more than 20 years, but I hit mandatory early law enforcement retirement, and they made me go. But the whole time I was working there, I felt like this was where I belonged. Underneath that, I felt a need to prove that I deserved to live another day. One of the effects of what's called betrayal trauma, which is trauma inflicted by someone in a trusted relationship, is that a young person will turn themselves inside out to account for it, to make it be okay. And so what I had in effect done was I took a guilty plea, and since I worked with pretrial inmates for 7 years, I had a thorough acquaintance with what that means. It means that you cut a deal and you plead guilty to whatever it is that they may reduce the charges to, and then you have to convince the judge that you're actually guilty. Whether or not you are actually guilty, you must be convincing. Because if the judge says, oh no, this is a made-up story, then the judge will reject the plea. So I had pled guilty to my mother's accusations that I was a bad person. And then I had to make it true. And I felt like a bad person. It's not like I felt that way consciously at every moment, but it was sort of the operating principle. I needed to prove I deserved to be here. I work pretty hard. I get a lot done. I get a lot of positive reinforcement for that. It's not what I should be doing. There's a way in which I need to be learning how to be motivated by something other than the conviction that I need to prove my own worth every minute. And what's been opening up for me in this past couple of years is I've been sort of intentionally moderating the drive to be perfect, but I've also found myself noticing it falling away. I still apologize a lot for mistakes. That's a habit I'm trying to break. But I feel more free. One of the things that has led me to move into this sense of freedom even before the pandemic, going back several years, has been participating in several workshops on racial healing. And starting with, I think the White Privilege Conference was the first one that I attended, but then a 5-day intensive at Pendle Hill with Yonu Span, Beyond Diversity 101 workshop. And in that context, I came to understand how perfectionism and this drivenness that many white people carry from the way that we were raised and from the expectations our social structure puts on us, when that plays out in an interracial context, it leads to an impact that is harmful, completely unintended on any conscious level, but harmful. And it's like, as a perfectionist, that I can fall into the role of the enforcer of rules or the enforcer of strict ways of doing things. Because I've got the capacity to most of the time attain those goals, to do it the right way, but I'm imposing it on other people who have burdens that I don't see, obstacles that I'm unaware of, and I'm holding them to account for not doing what I can do, or not doing it the right way. And what this has given me to understand is that on a very real level, my personal healing is necessary for the healing of the world. And the healing of every one of us is necessary for the healing of the world. And that it isn't, the purpose for delving into a history of psychological trauma is not to be a victim and to revel in that or to advertise that. It is to look for where's the path for transformation out of that. What can I share with others that can help them in their own quest for healing and transformation? And I've come to understand that one of the things that I am able to do is I can articulate this stuff. And, you know, I spent a lot of years as a therapy client and a lot of years as a therapist. And I grew up in a family that was kind of oriented this way. And I read a lot. And I can name the emotions that I'm experiencing. And I can figure out what they're about and where they came from. And I can see multiple layers in different situations. And so that's something that I can do. It's not a gift everybody thinks is a real pretty one. I'm aware of that. But I do hear from a number of people that it has been helpful to them to hear me talk about things in the way that I can. I am able to have my insides on the outside and be okay with that. And so that's a gift that I look sometimes to offer. It's not appropriate in every circumstance. So one of the things that I have to do now, part of my job, is figuring out how to enjoy my life more. Because I've been working too hard, and I haven't been bringing enough joy to myself and to other people. And we should all be looking for more joy in our lives, because I think that's one of the most important things that we're here for in this life. And how do we connect with one another and have more joy? Who is our community? And how can we share more in our community? I have felt that Central Philadelphia Monthly Meeting is my spiritual home for a number of years, and much more intensely since I stepped into the role of clerk. Although that gave full play to all my perfectionism. Didn't help me a bit with that. I'm a different kind of member of this community now, and I don't know what kind of member I am, but I'm moving into something different. I do know that having had the opportunity to be vulnerable with others from really different backgrounds, across racial lines, class lines, gender lines, age lines, has given me the chance to feel more alive and more free, and not in an abstract way. I feel different in my body now than I did 5 or 6 years ago. And I feel a degree of comfort and self-acceptance and ability to just be with people that I didn't know I didn't have before. It was just that my body felt different, and then I realized I've been carrying something really heavy for a really long time, and I'm not carrying it now. That's, I think, how we begin to know that we are healing. Well, I want to thank Gifts and Leadings Committee again for giving me this opportunity, and I'm grateful for having had the opportunity to hear what people have shared. Many kind things were said. I appreciate that. And also that the process of preparing for this presentation and giving this presentation today has been good practice for me in not criticizing myself for not doing it perfectly. And so thank you very much for that. I feel okay about it.
So let's close up with some final worship and thankfulness for being together. So thank you, Dana, for sharing of yourself so open-heartedly, and thank you to everyone present for bringing your full and loving attention to this time together. And we will close up now and look forward to being together in many other ways in the future.